I know this guy. He's nice and he loves Jesus. Miss Elizabeth, why don't you have kids? Have you tried Christian Mingle? Sorry, we can't add you to the email list because you don't have a kid. I know it gets discouraging. I was almost 40 years old when I met my husband. Just keep waiting. Mr. Right is out there. In my years of ministry, I have heard each of these statements, most of them more than once. And while none of them were intended to be hurtful, they each caused their own kind of pain. For example, I know this guy. He's nice and he loves Jesus. Don't get me wrong. If I make a list of all the things I need him to be nice and I need him to love Jesus. But is that it? Do you know me well enough to attempt to set me up? Or is my singleness a problem to be solved? Talking about singleness, especially in regards to single adults in ministry, is not something we do very often. And if I'm honest, it feels a little vulnerable for me. My name is Elizabeth Covington. I have been in ministry for over 8 years, and I'm currently serving as the children's pastor at Hayworth Wesleyan Church in High Point, North Carolina. Because I hope to be married one day, I am navigating the dating and ministry path, which can be complicated at times. But my desire to be married doesn't mean that that's the case for everyone. Singleness is not one size fits all. Some are single out of choice or desire to be single. Others are single because of the death of a spouse or maybe a divorce. And others may have different reasons for being single. Even though we don't talk about it often, we all probably know someone who is single and serving in ministry. While not intentional, I think we often overlook this group. And I think that there are ways that we can be more encouraging and supportive. 1 Thessalonians 5:11 says, "Therefore, encourage one another and build each other up, just as in fact you are doing." Let us continue doing the good work of encouraging each other and building each other up and dreaming about how we can continue to support and encourage the single people that serve alongside us in ministry. As I began really thinking about this topic of singleness in ministry, there were a few takeaways that I think we could all benefit from. The first is the need to remove the division. Oftentimes in the church, there's a spectrum from single to married, and it feels a little hierarchical. This perceived hierarchy can exist in the culture as well, but in the church specifically, marriage often feels like the golden standard, what we should all be seeking to achieve. Whether intentionally or unintentionally, the church tends to cater to married couples and families, oftentimes making those who are single feel less than or maybe even unwelcome. We host marriage retreats, parenting seminars, and family nights, all of which are great and necessary. But do we also create space for our single people to connect? And I don't mean a matchmaking connection, but a real and genuine connection to the church family. Do we do a great job of helping them feel like the church is a place where they belong, or do we leave them feeling like outsiders? While I have not been married, I know that marriage can be a beautiful thing, but seeking marriage should never be our primary purpose as believers. As believers, our primary purpose is to love God and love others. Do I want to be married? Yes. Do I want kids? Absolutely. But if I want either of those things more than I want to grow in my relationship with Jesus, I need to redefine my priorities. In my mid-20s, a church leader suggested dividing our young adult group into 2 groups, single and married. The problem for me, being on the older end of the group, is that I would have ended up with the college students and people in their early 20s, many of whom were still living at home. While I wasn't married, I was living independently and had a lot more in common with the married people in our group. In that moment, the idea of separating into 2 groups made me feel like I was left waiting to get married so I could graduate to the next class. The church leader listened to my concerns, and we ended up not dividing the group, which I think was the right decision for our group at that time. Think about your church for a moment. How are your small groups organized? Every church is different, but it is important to find small group structures that work for your church. But don't rush to divide single and married adults every single time. There are times when groups need to be divided so that specific conversations can happen, but there are other ways to break into small groups too. Book studies, topical studies, men and women groups, even parenting studies, and so many more ways. When considering church-wide events, think about the language being used and the activities involved. Is every event focused on the family? As a children's pastor, I know how important family events are in the life of the church, but we need to make sure that there are events that include everyone equally. Single, married, kids, and no kids. One way I have seen that work has been through men and women's events, retreats, and outings. While marriage may be mentioned at these events, it isn't the driving topic, and I'm not left feeling like I'm on the outside looking in. I'm personally very thankful to currently be involved with a small group made up of married and single adults. Some are single with kids, some are married, and some are married with kids. We are diverse, but we balance each other out, and I'm thankful for the diverse voices and outlooks. The second takeaway is this: we need to value time. Whether the person is single, married, 0 kids, or a whole busload, everyone needs time, especially time off. Different people may use time off in different ways, but everyone needs a break. I have read articles, listened to podcasts, and heard people talk about the blessings of singleness in ministry because a single person's time is more flexible, which is true. On the average Tuesday night, it is a lot easier for me to drop what I'm doing in the event of a church emergency because I don't have to arrange for childcare. I'm not left feeling guilty about leaving my spouse at home or expecting him to join in on whatever the emergency is. On a Sunday morning, the only person I have to get ready is myself. In many ways, my time is more flexible, but in many instances, that flexibility of time can be abused. Most single leaders in the church can tell at least a few stories in which they felt their time wasn't valued as highly as that of others. For some, they felt that they were asked or expected to come early and stay late, an expectation that wasn't placed on the married staff members to the same degree due to possible commitments at home. The reality is that time is a precious commodity. We all have a limited amount of time during the day, and we should value everyone's time equally. I've heard leaders remind pastors to make sure that they protect their family time, typically meaning time with a person's spouse and kids. And I agree with that statement completely, but my family doesn't live with me in my house. The need to protect family time always hits me a little harder than it should. So maybe we need to tweak that language just a little bit, because I think the sentiment is that we need to protect the key relationships in our lives. For my married friends, that means protecting time with their spouse. For parents, that means prioritizing their kids. Because I live alone, I often schedule things to do on my days off, typically to spend time with the people closest to me, going out of town to visit family, spending time with friends, and finding time to date. For me, my time off during the week and on vacation allows me to continue to pour into those key relationships in my life. I personally have been fortunate to work under 2 lead pastors who have helped me create boundaries to protect my time off. The emphasis that senior leadership places on protected time trickles down to everyone. The third takeaway is this: extend the invitation. I remember the first Sunday I served on staff at a church. As a pastor's kid, I had been in church every Sunday of my life, and I was used to walking in and knowing everyone. I always had a place to sit. I always felt like I belonged. But that first Sunday, I felt like an outsider. For the first time in my life, I drove to church alone. I sat on a pew alone, and I wondered if I would eat lunch alone too. But I quickly realized I was not alone. For the 3 years I served on staff at that church, the lead pastor and his family extended an open invitation to lunch with their family. At their house, going out to eat, grabbing something to go, whatever they were doing, I was invited. I went with them once a year to pick out their Christmas tree. We went grocery shopping. We watched TV. They made me feel welcome, included, and invited. There were Sundays that I needed a break, and I would say no and just go eat alone. But I was always thankful that they extended the invitation. When I think about ways that we can support and encourage the single adults on our teams, whether they be staff members or volunteers, I'm reminded of Tim and Jan and the way that they invited me into their family. So extend the invitation. Don't be afraid to invite the single people in your life to be a part of the ordinary and the bigger moments. If they're a big part of your kids' lives, invite them to their birthday parties. Scripture reminds us over and over and over again of the importance of community. Some of my best and closest friends are married, and some of my best and closest friends have kids. And there are few things in life that bring me as much joy as loving my friends well and loving their kids well. I'm also all about a good birthday party because cake and games. What's not to love? Another aspect to consider is the impact that holidays can have on single adults, especially single adults in ministry who may be spending the holidays working and far away from their families. Consider reaching out to see if they have plans and extending an invitation to be a part of your family celebration. Help make sure they aren't sitting home alone unless that's their choice. If you're going out to lunch after church, check to see if they have plans. They may say no, and that's great too. And don't feel hurt or offended if you extend an invitation and the person says no. I am an extrovert. I love being around people. But if I'm honest, there are days where being around a group of people, especially if they're all married, is just too much. There are days when a birthday party doesn't feel like the right place for me, so I don't always say yes, but I'm always thankful for the invitation. The final takeaway is this: avoid assumptions. Instead of making assumptions about the single people in your life, have conversations and ask questions. Don't assume that every single person in your life is looking for a relationship or marriage. Some may be in a season of choosing singleness, and some may not be ready for a relationship. Some may be grieving the loss of a partner or spouse, and some may be content in their singleness. Don't try to play matchmaker just to solve a problem. If you know two people that you genuinely think could build a great connection, and both of them are open, there are ways to enter into that conversation to help people get connected. But don't just point out that one single guy in the visiting musical group and try to set him up with the children's pastor. Yes, that happened to me. Twice. Being in ministry can be isolating and lonely, and the past 2 years have been exceedingly difficult for all of us, personally and professionally. I have learned to spend more time alone, which is not a lesson that I loved learning. During the stay-at-home orders, I spent an exceptional amount of time alone, but some of my best friends, a married couple, invited me in. Every few days, we met up, ate dinner, watched movies, and played games. It didn't matter to them that I was single, and it didn't matter to me that they were married. They saw a friend who needed a community, and they were intentional about being that for me. When Zach first asked me to talk about singleness in ministry, I took some time to really reflect on my experience as an unmarried female in ministry. A few weeks later, I found myself in the car with a few pastors' friends on the way to an event happening in our area specifically for pastors. On the way there, I was talking with them about this conversation, and when we left the event, one of my friends looked at me and said, "I noticed the speaker made comments assuming that we were all married. I would never have paid attention to that before today." It wasn't a major revelation, but the conversation on the way to the event caused him to stop and think about the language that was being used and how it might be perceived by the single ministers in attendance at the event. Awareness is often the first step to change. It's hard to make changes if we don't know there's a problem. So be aware. Remove the divisions, value everyone's time equally, extend invitations, and avoid making assumptions.